"People like you don't save men like me," he said, the kind of line that didn't just hang in the air. It settled into the bones of everyone who heard it. Heavy, dismissive, final. And Naomi Carter remembered it because she had been standing 3 feet away, holding a tray of untouched glasses, invisible as always, until that moment burned her into memory. But now the night had shifted, the city soaked under a cold spring rain, neon lights flickering against puddles that mirrored a world turned upside down. And there he was again, the same man, except this time there was no polished suit, no boardroom confidence, just a figure collapsed near the diner entrance, breathing shallow, his voice barely holding together as he whispered for help. And Naomi froze, one hand still gripping the door handle, the other pressed against her apron, because recognition hit fast and hard, not just his face but what he represented. Every door closed, every opportunity denied, every moment she had been looked through instead of at. And for a second that stretched longer than it should have, she didn't move, the rain tapping against the glass like a quiet countdown. Because this was the kind of moment people don't talk about, the space between what's deserved and what's right. And Naomi had lived her whole life balancing those two things, working double shifts, smiling through comments that tried to shrink her, carrying herself with a dignity no one ever bothered to notice. And now the man who once decided she wasn't worth a second look was lying just feet away, depending on her. And something inside her tightened, not anger, not even satisfaction, but a question, a sharp one, the kind that cuts clean. Who are you when no one is watching? And the answer didn't come from him. It came from her, from every quiet choice she had ever made, every time she chose grace when it would have been easier not to. And before the thought could settle into hesitation, she moved, fast, steady, pulling. The door opened against the wind, dropping to her knees beside him, her voice calm in a way that surprised even her, telling him to stay with her, guiding him inside inch by inch, the diner lights casting a soft glow over a scene that felt too real to be coincidence, too precise to be chance. And as she worked, hands sure, breath controlled, she didn't think about who he was anymore, only that he was there. And that was enough. Because sometimes the people we think deserve nothing are the ones handed everything in a single moment, and sometimes the ones with nothing are the ones who decide what happens next. And Naomi Carter made her decision without saying a word, even as somewhere deep down she knew this wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of something neither of them could undo. The diner felt different once the door closed behind them, like the world outside had been shut off and replaced with something quieter, heavier, more honest. And Naomi moved quickly, not rushed but precise, guiding him onto one of the worn leather booths near the window where the flickering streetlight cast a soft, uneven glow across his face. Her hand steady as she grabbed a clean towel, a glass of water, anything within reach that could help. And he watched her in fragments, his vision still catching up with reality, his breath uneven but stabilizing, his voice low as he tried to piece together what was happening, asking where he was, asking who she was. But Naomi did not answer those questions, not yet, because she understood something he did not, that sometimes answers come too soon and ruin the truth of a moment. And instead she focused on what mattered, telling him to breathe slowly, to stay present, to let the moment pass without fighting it, her tone calm in a way that did not ask for trust but earned it. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, he followed her lead, his shoulders easing, his expression softening, the sharp edge of control he carried like armor beginning to slip away. And for the first time in a long time, Ethan Blake was not the man in charge of anything, not the markets, not the room, not even himself. And there was something unsettling about that, something unfamiliar, because men like him built their lives on certainty, on control, on knowing exactly what came next. But here, under the hum of old fluorescent lights and the faint smell of coffee that had been sitting too long on the burner, none of that mattered. And Naomi saw it, the shift, the quiet unraveling of someone who had never been forced to sit in stillness before. And she did not rush to fill it, she let it breathe, because silence has a way of revealing things words cannot. And after a moment that stretched just enough, he looked at her again, really looked this time, not as a server, not as someone passing through his world unnoticed, but as the person holding it together in that exact second. And something flickered behind his eyes, not recognition yet, but the beginning of it, the uncomfortable awareness that this was not a coincidence, that this moment meant something more than he could explain, and Naomi felt it too, the weight of it pressing just beneath the surface, because she had seen that look before, the moment when someone starts to realize they have been wrong about something they never questioned, and she wondered if he would remember, not just her face, but the version of himself that once stood on the other side of a decision that changed her path without a second thought, and the thought lingered only briefly before she pushed it aside, because this was not about that, not yet, and as the rain outside began to slow, the rhythm softening against the glass, the world seemed to pause just long enough for everything to settle into place, and in that quiet, fragile stillness, neither of them spoke, but both of them understood something had shifted, something that could not be undone, something that would follow them long after this night was over. The silence did not last forever, because moments like that never do, and eventually the world finds its way back in, subtle at first, the hum of the refrigerator behind the counter, the distant sound of a car passing through rain still clinging to the streets, and Ethan shifted slightly in the booth, his strength returning in small pieces, enough for questions to come back, enough for awareness to sharpen. And this time when he looked at Naomi, there was intention behind it, a need to understand what had just happened and why she was still there, and his voice came out steadier, still quiet, but no longer lost, asking her name, asking why she helped him, asking the kind of questions a man asks when he is used to every answer having a clear transaction behind it. But Naomi did not answer right away, not because she did not hear him, but because she was choosing her words carefully, the same way she always had in a world that listened only halfway, and she moved toward the counter, pouring fresh coffee even though neither of them had asked for it, giving the moment space to settle. Before turning back, her expression calm, unreadable in a way that made him pause, because he was not used to that either, not used to people who did not rush to explain themselves to him. And when she finally spoke, her voice carried something firm but quiet, the kind of strength that does not need to be loud to be heard. She told him her name, Naomi Carter, and nothing more, no explanation, no justification, just the truth placed gently between them. And something about that simplicity made the air feel heavier, like there was more beneath it waiting to surface. And Ethan leaned back slightly, studying her face as if searching for something familiar, his mind working through fragments, half memories that refused to fully connect, because recognition is not always instant. Sometimes it builds slowly, piece by piece, until it becomes impossible to ignore, and Naomi saw it happening. The way his eyes lingered a second longer than before, the way his expression shifted from curiosity to something closer to unease. And she knew that look. She had seen it before too. The moment when someone begins to realize they have overlooked something important, and for a brief second she wondered if she should say it, if she should remind him of the day that still sat quietly in the background of her life, the interview room with glass walls, the polite smile that never reached his eyes, the decision delivered without weight because to him it had never been anything more than routine. And yet to her it had been everything. But she let the thought pass. Because this moment was not about proving anything. It was about revealing something. And there is a difference, and Ethan felt it even if he could not name it yet. The sense that he was standing on the edge of a realization that would not leave him unchanged. And as the clock above the counter ticked past midnight, marking the quiet transition from one day to the next, the distance between them felt smaller than it should have been, not because of what they said, but because of what remained unspoken. And in that space, something began to take shape, something that neither of them had planned, but both of them would have to face. It happened in a blink, not loud, not dramatic, just a quiet shift in the air that neither of them could ignore anymore. Because recognition does not always arrive like lightning. Sometimes it settles in like a slow sunrise, undeniable once it is there. And Ethan leaned forward slightly, his eyes narrowing just enough to show that something had finally connected, his voice lower now, more careful, as if speaking too loudly might break whatever truth was forming between them. And he said her name again, Naomi Carter, but this time it was different. This time it carried memory, and she saw it immediately, the exact moment he placed her, not as the woman who had just saved him, but as the one he had once dismissed without consequence. And for a second neither of them moved, because the weight of that realization did not need words to make itself known. It was already there, sitting between them like something real, something solid, and Ethan exhaled slowly, leaning back as if the space around him had suddenly become too small. Because men like him are used to controlling narratives, shaping outcomes, deciding what matters and what does not. But this was not something he could control. This was something he had already done, something that had already shaped her path, and now it had come back to meet him in a way he could not have predicted. And Naomi watched him without expression, not cold, not distant, just steady, because she had lived with that moment long enough for it to lose its sharpness, but not its meaning. And when he finally spoke again, there was no arrogance left in his tone, no assumption of authority, just something quieter, something closer to truth. He asked her if they had met before, even though they both knew the answer, and Naomi did not rush to respond. She let the silence stretch just long enough for the question to settle into something heavier, something honest, before she nodded once. Simple, direct, no added weight, just confirmation, and Ethan closed his eyes briefly, not in frustration, not in denial, but in recognition of something he had never stopped to consider: the impact of decisions made in passing, the quiet consequences of overlooking someone who did not fit into his version of what mattered. And when he opened his eyes again, there was something different there, not just awareness, but discomfort, the kind that comes when a person sees themselves clearly for the first time. And Naomi could see it, the shift from confidence to reflection, from certainty to questioning, and she did not interrupt it, because some realizations need room to breathe. And the diner held that space, the soft hum of the lights, the steady ticking of the clock, the rain now reduced to a gentle rhythm against the windows, everything moving slower, quieter, as if the world itself understood that this moment mattered. And Ethan finally spoke again, his voice steady but stripped of everything it once carried. And he said something simple, something that would have meant nothing on any other night. But here, in this space, it landed with weight. He said he was sorry, not loud, not performative, just honest. And Naomi heard it. But she did not react the way he might have expected, because apologies do not erase history. They acknowledge it, and she understood that better than most. And as she looked at him, not with anger, not with satisfaction, but with something far more grounded, she realized that this was not about what he had done before. It was about what he would do now, and whether he would carry this moment forward or leave it behind like so many others. And in that quiet, unspoken question, the story began to shift again, not toward resolution, but toward something deeper, something neither of them could walk away from unchanged. Naomi did not respond to his apology the way most people would have expected. There was no immediate forgiveness, no visible reaction that would give him relief. Instead, she simply reached for the coffee she had poured earlier and placed it in front of him with the same steady calm she had shown since the moment he crossed that threshold. And that silence said more than any words could have, because Ethan realized something in that instant that he had never truly faced before: that not every mistake could be corrected with a sentence, not every moment could be rewritten just because he finally understood it. And as he wrapped his hands around the warm mug, feeling the heat seep slowly into his skin, he looked around the diner again, really looked this time, not as a passing glance, but as someone trying to understand a place he had never noticed before: the worn edges of the counter, the faint hum of aging lights, the quiet evidence of long hours and quiet resilience. And he began to see what had always been there, but never registered: the world that existed outside of his own, the one he had moved through without ever stopping. And Naomi watched him as he took it in, not with judgment, but with a kind of quiet observation, because she knew this moment was not about her anymore. It was about what he was beginning to see. And for the first time in his life, Ethan Blake did not rush to speak. He did not try to fill the space with explanations or promises. He simply sat there, present, which was something he had rarely allowed himself to be. And when he finally looked back at her, his expression had shifted again, softer now, not weakened but grounded, like someone who had just realized the ground beneath them was different than they thought. And he asked her something unexpected, not about what happened tonight, not about the past, but about her, about how long she had worked here, about what she wanted beyond this place. Questions that did not carry an agenda but a genuine curiosity that felt unfamiliar even to him. And Naomi paused for a moment before answering, not because she was unsure, but because she was measuring the weight of his words, deciding if they deserved an answer beyond politeness. And when she spoke, her voice remained even, telling him just enough that she had been working double shifts for years, that she had plans once, opportunities that did not work out the way she had hoped, and she left it there. No bitterness, no elaboration, just the truth presented without decoration. And Ethan understood more than she said, because sometimes what is left unsaid carries more meaning than what is spoken. And he nodded slowly, absorbing it, recognizing the quiet strength in the way she spoke about her life without asking for sympathy. And something inside him settled into a realization that was both uncomfortable and necessary, that the difference between them had never been ability or worth, it had been perspective, and his had been far too narrow for far too long. And as the minutes passed, and the night grew quieter, the distance between who he was and who he needed to become became clearer, not as an idea, but as a choice he could no longer ignore. And Naomi, standing just a few feet away, did not push him toward it, did not guide him there. She simply existed in that space, steady and unwavering. And somehow that was enough to change everything. The night did not end with a grand realization or a dramatic shift. It moved forward quietly, the way real change often does, one small moment at a time. And Ethan sat there longer than he needed to, longer than any version of himself from before would have allowed, because something about leaving too quickly felt wrong, like walking away would erase the weight of what had just happened. And for the first time in years, he did not want to erase anything. He wanted to understand it, to sit in it, to let it stay long enough to matter. And Naomi noticed it, the way he did not check a watch, did not reach for a phone, did not try to reclaim control of the situation. He simply remained present, and that alone told her more than any words could have. Because people reveal themselves most clearly in what they choose not to do. And as the clock edged closer to 1 in the morning, the diner felt almost suspended in time, like the outside world had paused just enough to give this moment room to unfold. And Ethan finally stood, slow and steady, testing his balance. Not because he was weak, but because he was aware now in a way he had not been before, aware of himself, of her, of everything that had quietly shifted between them. And he reached for his wallet out of instinct, the familiar gesture of someone used to solving situations with ease. But he stopped halfway, his hand hovering for a second before dropping back to his side, because even he could see it, that this was not a moment that could be reduced to a transaction, not something that could be measured or repaid in the way he was used to. And Naomi saw that hesitation, the decision behind it. And for the first time that night, something in her expression softened just slightly, not approval, not acceptance, but recognition, the understanding that he was beginning to see what truly mattered. And Ethan took a breath, steady and deliberate, before speaking again, his voice no longer carrying the weight of authority, but something far more grounded. And he told her that he would not forget this, not in the casual way people promise things they never intend to keep, but in a way that felt anchored, intentional, as if he was making that promise more to himself than to her. And Naomi listened, her posture unchanged, her gaze steady, because she had heard promises before, words that sounded meaningful in the moment but faded with time, and she knew better than to measure truth by what was said in a single night. And yet something about the way he spoke made her pause, not fully believing, but not dismissing it either. And as he moved toward the door, the rain now reduced to a soft drizzle, the city quieter than before, he stopped for a brief second, his hand resting on the handle as if there was one more thing he needed to understand. And he looked back at her, not as someone above or below him, but simply as someone who had changed the course of his night, and maybe more than that. And without overthinking it, he asked her a question that carried more weight than it seemed. He asked if she would be there tomorrow, and Naomi did not answer right away, because she understood what he was really asking, not about her schedule, but about whether this moment would continue beyond this night. And after a pause that felt just long enough, she gave a simple answer, the kind that did not promise anything but left the door open. And as he stepped out into the damp quiet of the early morning, something followed him that he could not leave behind. Not her, not the diner, but the realization that for once in his life, the most important thing that had happened to him could not be controlled, bought, or undone. And that realization stayed with him long after the door Closed behind him, the city did not look different the next morning. But something about it felt unfamiliar to Ethan, as if the same streets he had driven 100 times now carried a weight he had never noticed before, and he sat in the back of his car longer than necessary, engine off, hands resting still, watching people move past him without a second glance, people who had places to be, jobs to get to, lives that did not revolve around boardrooms or billion-dollar decisions. And for the first time, he did not see them as background. He saw them as stories he had never taken the time to understand, and that realization stayed with him as he walked into his office later that morning. A space designed to reflect control, precision, power, everything he had built his identity around. But even there, surrounded by glass walls and quiet efficiency, something felt out of place, not in the room, but in him. Because once a perspective shifts, it does not easily return to what it was before, and his assistant noticed it immediately. The pause before he spoke, the way his attention drifted, the absence of the usual sharp focus that defined him. But she said nothing, because people like Ethan were not questioned, they were followed. And yet, even as meetings began and voices filled the room with numbers and projections, his mind kept returning to a small diner under flickering lights, to a woman who had no reason to help him and did anyway, and the contrast between those two worlds grew sharper with every passing minute, until finally, without explanation, he stood, cutting through the rhythm of the meeting in a way that drew attention without needing to raise his voice, and he said he needed to step out, leaving behind a room full of people who were not used to seeing him walk away from anything. And the drive back felt shorter than it should have, not because of distance, but because his focus had narrowed to a single point. And when he stepped out onto the sidewalk again, the diner looked the same as it had the night before, quiet, unremarkable to anyone who did not know what had happened inside. But to him it carried something more, something he could not ignore. And as he pushed the door open, the familiar sound of the bell echoed softly. And there she was, Naomi, moving behind the counter with the same calm presence, as if nothing had changed, as if the night before had not shifted anything at all. And for a moment he stood there, taking it in, because this was the part most people missed, the continuation, the choice to return, and Naomi noticed him without surprise, without reaction, just a simple acknowledgement that he was there, and she did not stop what she was doing, did not rush to meet him, because she understood something he was only beginning to learn, that real moments do not need to be chased, they reveal themselves in time. And Ethan stepped closer, slower this time, not out of hesitation but intention, and when he finally spoke, his voice carried something different, not the urgency of the night before, not the uncertainty, but something steadier, something that had settled into place. And he told her he came back, not because he had to, not because he owed her something he could define, but because leaving it at that would have meant missing the point entirely. And Naomi listened, her expression unchanged but her attention fully there. And for the first time since this all began, it was clear that whatever this moment was becoming, it was no longer about a single act. It was about what came after, and whether either of them was willing to let it matter. Naomi set a cup of coffee in front of him without asking, the same quiet gesture as the night before, but this time it carried a different weight, because now it was not about urgency or survival. It was about choice, and Ethan noticed that immediately. The way she did not treat him differently, did not adjust her tone or her pace just because he had walked back into her space. And that steadiness grounded him more than anything else could have, because for the first time in a long time, he was not being responded to as a title or a position, but as a person, and that realization settled deeper than he expected, and he took a slow breath before speaking, choosing his words carefully, not out of strategy but out of respect, telling her that he had spent the entire morning thinking about what happened, about the decisions he had made in the past, about the way he had moved through the world without ever questioning the impact of those decisions. And Naomi listened without interruption, her posture relaxed but attentive, because she understood something he was still learning. That reflection is easy to speak about, but difficult to carry forward. And when he finished, there was a brief pause, not uncomfortable, just honest, and she leaned slightly against the counter, meeting his gaze without hesitation, and she asked him a simple question, one that did not sound complicated but held more weight than anything he had said. She asked him what he was going to do with that realization, not yesterday, not in theory, but today, and Ethan did not answer right away, because for once he did not have a prepared response, no clear path mapped out. Just the awareness that whatever came next had to be different from everything that came before, and he nodded. Slowly, acknowledging the truth in her question, and instead of offering a promise he could not yet define, he chose something smaller, something real. He told her he wanted to start by understanding her story, not as a gesture, not as a favor, but because it mattered, and Naomi studied him for a moment, measuring the sincerity behind his words. Because she had learned to recognize the difference between curiosity and intention, and after a quiet second, she gave a slight nod, not an invitation, not a rejection, just an opening. And as she began to speak, not about everything, not all at once, but about the parts that shaped her, the long shifts, the missed chances, the quiet resilience that carried her through days no one else saw. Ethan listened in a way he had never listened before, not waiting to respond, not filtering it through his own perspective, just absorbing it as it was, and something shifted again, not dramatically, not visibly, but in a way that felt lasting, because this was no longer about a single moment of kindness. It was about understanding the weight behind it. And as the conversation moved forward, steady and unforced, the distance between them continued to change, not erased, but redefined. And for the first time, it became clear that whatever had begun that night was not something that would fade with time. It was something that would grow, shaped not by what had already happened, but by what they chose to do next. The conversation did not end with a grand promise or a dramatic agreement. It settled into something quieter, something more real. And as the morning light filtered through the diner windows, soft and unassuming, it revealed what had changed without needing to announce it. Because Ethan was still there, not out of obligation, not out of curiosity alone, but because he had chosen to stay long enough to understand, and that choice, simple as it seemed, carried more weight than anything he could have offered the night before, and Naomi recognized it, not in what he said, but in what he did, in the way he listened without interruption, in the way he did not try to redirect the conversation back to himself, in the way he allowed her story to exist without trying to reshape it. And that was where everything truly shifted. Not in the act of saving a life, but in the act of finally seeing one, and Ethan felt it too. The difference between knowing something intellectually and understanding it in a way that changes how you move through the world. Because for years he had built his life on outcomes, on measurable success, on decisions that could be calculated and justified. But this was different. This was not something that could be reduced to numbers or strategy. This was something that required him to change in ways he had never considered. And as he stood to leave, the second time now, there was no hesitation in his movements, no uncertainty in his expression, just a quiet clarity that had not been there before. And he did not reach for his wallet, did not offer anything that could be mistaken for repayment, because he understood now that this was not about balancing a scale, it was about redefining it entirely. And instead he looked at Naomi with a steadiness that matched her own. And he told her that what happened that night would not end there, not because he felt obligated, but because he refused to let it become just another moment he moved past. And Naomi held his gaze, measuring the weight of his words not by how they sounded, but by how they were carried. And for the first time, there was a subtle shift in her expression, something almost imperceptible but real, a quiet acknowledgement that he had crossed from understanding into intention. And she nodded once, not as approval, not as permission, but as recognition, because she knew that whatever came next would not be defined by what he said in that moment. It would be defined by